A number of years ago, a Delta airliner was lined up waiting for takeoff at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport, and it was in a line of about 4 or 5 other airliners, and they were waiting a very long time. And then all of a sudden, the tower called this Delta flight and said that they were next to take off, that they could bypass the other planes and take off immediately. So they got to the runway and they started their takeoff roll. And a minute or so later, this is what the plane looked like. So immediately after liftoff, the plane struggled to stay in the air and was airborne only a few seconds before it crashed to the ground and ended up like this at the end of the runway. Most of the passengers escaped without injury, but a number of passengers died in the rear section of the plane where the fire was the most severe. At the end of the investigation, it was found that the reason that the Delta airliner was not able to maintain flight was because the pilots did not extend the flaps and the slats for proper takeoff configuration. This was part of their checklist, which they apparently went by very quickly and did not check it the way they should have. And because of that, they crashed a perfectly good airplane. So what I want to emphasize in this video is the checklist. Now, surely in our industry, if you do not follow a checklist, you're not going to probably take lives. But it is important to follow checklists to make sure that we do the job correctly and properly and do it efficiently and do it well. So in the service group, we kind of have a joke about day one because we hear this a lot from homeowners that tell us that their unit never worked correctly since day one. It got to be such a joke that somebody even made up a day one bulletin that talked about coverage for day one problems. This is a dealer setup checklist that was usually attached to the back end of the installation guide on most of our units. Starts off with the what it's for split system air conditioners and heat pumps. The next section is for the customer name and address so that we know who this unit has been sold to and where it was installed. And the next thing is very important anytime you're dealing with technical support or you're dealing with warranty issues, the model and serial number of the unit that we're working on is very critical. And so this gives you a place to put both the indoor and the outdoor unit model number. Notice the first thing on the checklist is to check the equipment for shipping damage. This should be done as soon as you unbox the piece of equipment. And if there is any shipping damage, you need to notify the warehouse where you picked it up because the shipping damage is handled completely differently than if there is any damage or work from the factory that needs to be noted. And then there's other things, proper drainage for a heat pump, the location of the unit. And you go down the checklist to make sure that you've covered all of your bases on the install for this particular piece of equipment. Then on the back side of the checklist, there's places to list your power, what your supply voltage is, what your control voltage, your pressures and your temperatures. Make sure that all your refrigeration valves are open and everything is working correctly. Make sure that there's no tubes rubbing together. Make sure that the defrost cycle works. And this, again, this is just a checklist to make sure that you don't miss something on the installation of this unit. This is a different type of checklist. This is a heat pump job site information sheet. Again, you have the owner of the equipment, the servicing contractor, the distributor that it was bought from, and again, the outdoor and indoor model and serial numbers, and goes down through basically all the same information. One thing nice about a checklist like this is it gives you a visual of the refrigeration cycle so that when you're taking your temperatures and your pressures, you also have a visual representation of the system. Many people are visual learners, and by looking at a diagram like this, if there are any problems, they should be able to pick it up pretty quickly on a diagram like this. So these kind of checklists are available for most of your technical support or service departments. There's also startup checklists for gas furnaces and air handlers. These give you a position for again, the owner of the equipment, the servicing contractor, the model and serial number of the furnace, and it also gives you a place to put all your temperatures for your temperature rise, pressures for your gas and pressure switches, and your voltage readings for the furnace. This gives you a record of what was recorded at startup, so if there's any problems down the road, you have a base to work off of. And this particular check sheet on the back, again, has a visual representation, checking the temperatures through the heat exchanger, make sure that it's vented correctly, and then it has a high voltage circuit and a low voltage circuit to make sure that everything is connected correctly. We have mentioned these two items before, but they bear repeating because we get a lot of calls on these two items. A final tubing check. In the installation guide, you're directed to check to be certain that factory tubing on both the indoor and outdoor unit has not shifted during shipment. Ensure tubes are not rubbing against each other or any sheet metal, and pay close attention to feeder tubes, making sure wire ties on feeder tubes are secure and tight. We get a lot of calls on units that have been in operation for a period of time, and the tubing has rubbed together and eventually released a refrigerant. So this should be noted on the startup sheet that this has taken place. The second thing is the final wiring check, where you should check the factory wiring and field wire connections to ensure that the terminations are secured properly. Check wire routing to ensure wires are not in contact with tubing, sheet metal, and so forth. Again, we've had numerous calls that because of loose connections on units, things have gotten burnt up when the unit was started up because there was a loose connection on a contactor or some point of connection. So make sure you do your final tubing check and your final wiring check before you put the power to a brand new unit. So make sure that you use a startup checklist for all your jobs and keep them on file. If there are any issues down the road, you will have a file of conditions at startup and any issues that you dealt with during the life of the unit. This goes a long way in getting factory help if something catastrophic happens.
Go to arefco.com for more videos, like, subscribe, and check back every week for new videos.